All right, welcome. This is our monthly gathering call, and some of you are new to me, and I might be new to you. I'm Samantha Moe, and I'm really glad that you're here. The point of this monthly gathering call is to give us an opportunity to connect and talk about something that's really near and dear to my heart, which is parenting or working with emotionally intense children. You may have seen, every single month I have a little bit of a theme, which I'm going to talk about it momentarily, but really I'm hoping that this creates a space for you where you feel supported and you feel loved. I think in parenting, it can be really easy to be in spaces where we're criticized or judged or we feel guilty. And the thing is, if you're here, you saw some sort of email about my specialty, which are brain-based parenting tools to create more peace at home and help the parent-child relationship to feel better. So I'm just really glad you're here. I wanted to say that directly. Now, because I offer these calls monthly, even though I work with a lot of families, these calls can feel really intimate and supportive. And there's not always a place on a webinar where you get to unmute and ask your questions. This is that place. So we're going to talk about what it means to have a kid with more of an emotionally intense brain today. We're going to talk about what happens if we misperceive the reason for their behaviors. And we're going to talk about some ways that we could make things better quickly in our families because I don't know, I don't have time to waste. You don't have time to waste. And as parents, there are so many resources out there. And I just want to thank you again for being here because I know there's a lot of places that you can go. So I usually try to connect the dots with what's happening in individual families and their kids' behavior so that you have an idea of something you might be able to do to make things better. If you are willing, please type in the chat box why you're here. I did read a bunch of forms, several dozen, earlier today when you went to register. I even got a double form. I see that you're here. I'm saying that playfully. You duplicated. You really wanted to be here. It's nice to see you. Sometimes people wonder if I know their stories or read their forms, and I promise you that I did. So I'd love to hear why you're here today. And as you're typing that in, I'm going to share a few slides and do some teaching for about maybe 15 minutes or so. And then I'm going to open the line. You can share more about whatever you might type in the chat box about some challenges or some questions that you have. All right. And if this is your multipleth time for being here, like Lisa, glad to have you here for a refresher. All right, so let's talk about this theme of the month, which is what happens when we are raising a kiddo and it seems like everybody around us has things figured out and we don't feel like we're able to bounce back as well or keep pace. I had written a blog about this a few days ago and gotten a lot of responses because a couple, maybe about 15 years ago, I started having some autoimmune symptoms and flares. And so even though I'm an international parent coaching business and I do keynote speaking and I've worked with nearly 1,000 diverse families, I understand that when we have a constant stressor in our lives, sometimes that stressor is our kiddo and going on the healing path with them as well. It can feel discouraging at times. It can feel like slowing down is going backwards. We might have fear develop for what the future is going to look like for our kid or for ourselves when we can't really maybe keep pace if we feel like we're running out of energy. And because that had been a theme in my professional life as the CEO of a company the last month or so, I just wanted to acknowledge that and bring it to the space. And we're going to, as we talk about now, our children, if you don't know me, one of the things that I'm known for is this Magic Lad Blueprint, where I teach 8 brain-based pillars to create more peace at home. And the way that this information started coming together in 2004, I mean, it was early. In 2004, I graduated with a master's in communication disorders. And if you would have seen me then, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I mean, I'm kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed now too, but 20 years ago, I was an autism specialist. And I remember working at a school and standing outside the door to the 3rd grade classroom with my hand on the knob and feeling dread. wondering like, oh, how is this transition with this 8-year-old Charlie who's known for his epic meltdowns? How's this going to go today? And I wasn't a parent yet at the time. And um, I transitioned him out of the classroom to do a speech therapy and social skills lesson with him. And when we were 15 steps away from my office, I remember hope was building. Like, okay, maybe this time we're not going to have one of those epic meltdowns. And we got closer, 14 steps, 13, 12, 11, 10, and he had a meltdown. And it's a meltdown that, now that I'm a parent, I know like meltdowns are the on the floor, kicking, flailing, screaming those things you never want to hear a child scream at you, especially in public, that sometimes we take personally. And when I looked down at Charlie, I had this moment of fear where I looked over at the teachers who were peering through the cafeteria doorway. I felt like maybe they were judging me. What is Samantha going to do this time? And when I looked down at Charlie, I could feel the sweat drip down my back. And I thought, I should know better than the average person what to do in this moment, but I didn't. And so this kicked off a journey for me of trying to figure out what is the missing piece so that I don't have to be in that situation feeling sweaty. I don't know if you feel sweaty in those situations. Maybe you see red. Maybe you're not in freeze mode like I tend towards. Maybe you're more like red zone and you want to fight, or maybe you get more of the flee zone of like, I just got to get out of here. I gotta get away from this. Either way, that really stimulated me to figure out how can we use our talents and the things we know because we're grown-ups, how can we use that to shape a child like Charlie who has really intense behavior and intense reactions and is dysregulated? And when I started researching this, thank goodness I was propelled by the voice of my mother, Cheryl, in my head. She raised myself and my 4 siblings plus 5 daycare kids. We grew up in a suburb here in Minnesota. And I heard her voice say, every child has gifts. You can learn to draw them out. And so that's some of what we talk about on these calls. We take the perspective that you're doing the best that you can, and that kids' behavior is communicating to us that something's off. And the thing that's off, to be really clear from the Magic Lad Blueprint, when things are off, it's usually that the downstairs brain is activated. And for kids who have really frequent high intensity emotions, meltdowns, reactions, and this goes way beyond autism. This is the kid who's strong-willed, has stubborn characteristics, the kid who's gifted, children with other diagnoses like sensory processing disorder, ADHD, of course, oppositional defiant disorder. When the downstairs brain is active and overactive, fight, flight, or freeze is really what's running the show. And this is brain science that comes from Dr. Daniel Siegel, who wrote the book, The Whole Brain Child, and many other books. So tell me what you know. I see, for those of you who are on the call, type in the chat box, what do you know about fight, flight, or freeze? And this might be, it can be a short answer. This might be from a book you read. It might be from a therapist or educator you worked with, a pediatrician. It might be something you heard in some sort of audio. Like, what do you know about fight, flight, or freeze? And as you're writing that down, and I check the chat box here and there as I'm teaching here and training, I'm glad that you're here too, Brandon. So when you have a 5-year-old who's sometimes defiant and challenging, those are moments where the downstairs brain is active, that defiance. And so that means adrenaline and cortisol are flooding the system. This is primitive and early developing. Some people call it lizard brain or the reptilian brain because it's early, it's primitive and it's early in development when we're a little zygote and we're a little egg in the womb and developing as human beings. The nervous system controls it all. You got that right, Andy. My husband's a chiropractor. He'd call it the sympathetic nervous system, reacting or responding. And so we want to understand this downstairs brain because it's in opposition to what we're trying to do as caregivers. The upstairs brain is responsible for problem solving and paying attention and managing behavior. But the trouble is, when the downstairs brain is activated, there's no pathway to access upstairs brain skills. And this is really interesting because as grown-ups, we're used to practicing upstairs brain skills. I can remember dealing with meltdowns similar to Charlie's and trying to do problem solving. And I hear myself saying something that now sounds really dumb, like, hey, what do we need to do here right now instead of screaming, I hate you? Right? Like problem solving is not going to work in that moment. And the brain science supports this information. In the autism world, it's really common to do like use a touch cue, like, hey, look at me when I'm talking to you. We might say this to kids with ADHD too. I have a 3.5-year-old at home. So I might be like, Mason, mommy's here. Listen to me. What did I say? But in the moment when there's fire in the brain, that is not actually registering where he's able to pay attention. He's seeing red. Or behavioral management tools. So my friend Kathy Flaminio created Move Mindfully. It's a mindfulness movement breathing program in the public schools here. And so she's great at helping kids take themselves through anger release poses and, getting into focus and rebalancing and calming. But those behavioral management tools, when I've tried to use them in the moment at home, or if back when I was a new graduate, trying to use the breathing ball with Charlie, like, hey, take a deep breath, do what, make your belly big, let a lot of air in like this breathing ball. When I would go to hand that to Charlie, you know what he would do? He'd like try throw it and possibly at me. Move Mindfully is the program. I think the website is move-mindfully.org. It's really lovely. And there's a great app too. Only $10. So with downstairs brain knowledge and upstairs brain knowledge, we can start understanding where our kid is and where we go wrong because we're using upstairs brain skills when the first line of attack, or that's the wrong word, the first line of response really needs to be calming the fire in the brain. And so this is the language that I've created as part of my curriculum so that it's really simple for us to understand. Because I could talk about, the nervous system and dysregulation and what did the occupational therapy person say. But when I understand there's fire in the brain, it starts cluing me in, and I'm hoping this will clue you in too. Like, well, what do we do when there's fire and what do we not do? And sometimes the not is the most important step at the beginning here. What we need to not do is we need to not add fuel to the fire. So if you're willing to take a moment here, I want you to know what fuel looks like in your house. All right. If you're willing to type it, if you're not, that's okay. Just write it down for yourself. But this is an honest space here. So if you're comfortable sharing, type so that I know, what does fire look like in your home? Now, this could be your kid. I'm hoping it will also be yourself because we have our own fire. I'm admitting to you that my fire looks a lot more like freeze. I didn't grow up in a too much of a yelling household. So that's not really patterned for me, but there are other things that really are. So I'm reading the chat box here. Yeah, so hypervigilance. So in a child's hypervigilant, the fire might look like controlling our actions to help themselves feel safe. So I see about that adoption at 3. Raised voices, of course, yeah. Sometimes there's door slamming. I know our own meltdowns. Disconnect. Yeah. And we want to become aware of this because what doesn't work if we're trying to create more peace at home, what doesn't work is trying to control our kids so they stop being fiery. Doesn't work, not for intense kids especially. So let me define that for you. You have more of an emotionally intense kid when you see these signals. They're controlling, they're demanding. And if you have more than one kid or you have a kid who's not intense, you'll understand like, oh yeah, my other kid isn't demanding and trying to control my every move. And so for those of you who didn't realize there are kids like that, there are. We know you have more of an intense brain child when the triggers are confusing. So this can be kids with sensory challenges like the tag on the back of the shirt or getting the seam of the sock lined up just right or getting seamless socks. But things also like they had an idea in their mind. I was going to eat a banana for breakfast, and you didn't know, and you accidentally ate it, and then they really have an intense emotional response or reaction. And then also, if they have that intense response, we know that you have more of an intense brain kid if you default to authoritarian parenting, which is how many generations leading up until now parented and raised us. There are certain cultures that do it. There's definitely an age component here as well. If you say, you will obey me because hurting is not okay and I expect it, if we're not understanding of what our kid needs to calm fire in the brain, you'll notice that they escalate more. And you're like, how is this little, like sometimes small sized child or person, how are they so reactive and bossing me around and acting so enraged? I'm the boss here. And there can be lots of monologues that happen in our own heads. Like, I need to nip this in the bud, and I need to make sure that they can be safe, because how are they going to be successful at school and make friends, and they need to respect authority, and yada, yada, yada. Like, all of that stuff happens in those moments. You probably know how you think when your child's showing some of this behavior. But ultimately, the brain science tells us if you match fire with fire, it's going to get worse. Your child's not going to back down. Now, when I was growing up, because I have more tendency for freeze mode, which also means I have more of a pleaser personality, that didn't happen. So I would back down if things were really intense at home. All right, let me just check what you're saying here. Okay. Yeah, your son is demanding and trying to boss you around. Got that. So we want to know about intense brain kids because there are certain tools that you can use in a very specific order to calm the fire in their brain. And I'm curious, what kind of mindful tools or parenting tools have you tried that seemed like a good idea that didn't work for your kid or your personality or your family circumstance? Because this is really interesting. When we know about fire in the brain and we try to change the way we were parented and do something different with our kid, what you'll find is some really well-meaning tools sometimes don't work with our kid. And if you have any of those, I'm happy to shed light on why some specific things don't work. But I also want to show you something really clearly that's hidden in our everyday language so that you understand what adds fuel to the fire. Okay, so this is where you start developing an understanding of how we influence behavior and fire in the brain, even when we're not meaning to. So if you're willing, notice if you're willing to close your eyes, please do. But I'm also trauma informed, so if you don't want to close your eyes, just look somewhere else, look down, and tune into your body and notice what happens when you hear my voice. I'm going to use a fire starter. Okay, so notice it's only 30 seconds. No, stop that. Knock it off. Ugh, don't do that every day. I said no. No. And open your eyes. So type in the chat box what you noticed in your body. Starting phrases with no adds fuel to the fire. And there are actually 11 of these fire starter behaviors. So when you're typing, I'll grab the link for that in case you want to see it. And we want to know these fire starter behaviors because this sometimes is where we shoot ourselves in the foot, where we're trying to help kids become better listeners and we're trying to teach them sometimes the right thing to do. Here we go. Here's the link. It's at the bottom of my website on samanthamo.com/parents, but I'll put it here. So with these fire starters, since there are 11 of them, yeah, you notice your heart rate increases, which is a sign that the downstairs brain is activating. Heart rate increases, blood flows, breath grows shallow. Ruth, what you're saying is really true. We feel tension. Sometimes it's in our shoulders. Sometimes it's butterflies in our stomach. A few other responses are that when you feel fire triggered in your brain, the response you might have is the fight response. So if you're somebody who's not afraid of conflict, you're like, oh yeah, I heard you saying that. And I'm like, don't tell me what to do. Or you might have tuned me out. You might have been like, whatever, not listening to you. So the 4 common responses are sort of tension or physiological response, like increased heart rate, even though you didn't do anything wrong. And I'm hopefully not a scary presence to you, but it's triggering that in your downstairs brain. The sadness or wilting response for kids who internalize stress, or you as an adult. You might think like, oh, I'm doing something wrong, or I felt like I was a bad person, even though I didn't do anything wrong just now. You might have the conflict response, or I call it the retaliation response. Or you might have had the whatever, I'm going to tune Samantha out response. And it makes sense from a study that was done, like, why are we getting stuck in this trap where we say no all the time? And the study said that by the time kids are toddlers, they hear the word no, they're told no, or they're given a stern correction or a directive every 9 minutes. So for those of you who have bossy toddlers, we're just getting to the end of that stage, but older toddler. You understand why you say no, where you're like, oh my gosh, the kid's climbing on this chair that like spins and rolls, and I'm across the room, so you gotta be like, no, 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 no. Or things look really interesting, like the light sockets. You're like, no, 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 no. But unfortunately, when you have a kid with more of a strong-willed tendency who might be extra brave, like not afraid of adventure or risk, has high energy and low impulse control, we neglect to fade these stern directives or these corrections. And so this starts hopefully to paint the picture as to, like, if we're parenting an intense child and we want there to be peace at home, why isn't there? Well, from a parenting perspective, traditional methods often aren't the right match. Or like a mom I worked with who was using more like modern empathetic parenting, what she noticed with her 5-year-old is she said, it takes us 45 minutes to get out the door every day. And he's arguing about putting his shoes on, and I sit next to him and I don't yell it back, and I say, I can see you're upset. And she's like, but we're burning time. My toddler gets no attention in those moments. And like, what am I supposed to do? I've been doing it for 3 years. And so sometimes we're misguided, because an empathetic approach is amazing. And it's part of the 8 pillars. Like, how do we acknowledge kids' emotions? And not just because it's kind, but because the brain science says when you connect a kid to their emotions and you say things like, I see you're upset, this is frustrating, this is hard, the brain science says it connects them to you. It helps them to not feel alone and lonely in these big feelings. But if you're missing a component like positive discipline and how to have boundaries for things like, there's also a no hurting rule or a no screaming rule in our family. Like, how do we bridge these two so that we've got the kindness factor and we get to have boundaries? This creates a power balance because we're acknowledging what children need for development. And then we're also acknowledging what we need to have authority. And so this is called authoritative parenting, which is like the healthy kind. If you do a Google search, there's like authoritarian, which is you're the boss, you're not being flexible, you become a hammer where you're like, I'm going to get louder and firmer because you need to listen. I'm the adult, you're the kid. Doesn't work great for these kiddos. And we've got authoritative, which is I as a parent, as a mom, I feel empowered. You as a caregiver, you feel empowered. The kid feels empowered because we're acknowledging their emotions, and we're doing things like special quality play to give them happy chemicals to kind of balance out the stress chemistry. And it's also not permissive parenting of like, okay, well, I'm acknowledging your emotions, but then I don't know what else to do, so I'll just let it go. And there's no judgment when I say that. I'm just hoping to help you recognize that there's the whole spectrum, and we fall somewhere in there typically. Okay, so let me think what else is important to share, and then I'll open this up for anybody who wants to explore more with me. So why do kids behave the way that they do? We could say fire in the brain. And are there other contributing factors? Like, is there birth trauma? Is there pre-verbal trauma? Right? Sometimes that's true in foster situations. What else did I see in the chat box? Neglect. Yeah, that's trauma. That'll create a sense of detached disruption in attachment, which creates a lot of fight or flight stress. And some kids will externalize that. Some kids will internalize that stress. And like as a teenager, I would black out before 10th grade high school because I had internalized a lot of the stress in my home. one of the reasons I do this work out of love for family and creating an enjoyable space for parents and children. So why do kids behave the way that they do? And then why do we behave the way that we do? Like, why do we react that way? And there's a lot of reasons to that too, right? Is it our own patterning, our own upbringing? Do we only have a piece of the puzzle? Maybe we're informed, but slightly misinformed. And sometimes our culture contributes to that. I know from the forums that I read that there's a lot of diversity, either attending the call or listening to the replay. So why, do we have a belief either from culture, our age, race, gender, ethnic background, religion, finances, educational background? Does something about our identity influence us to say, even though I'm getting new knowledge about fire in the brain, I can't parent in the way my kid needs? Like there are some parents who say, hey, I understand that if I need to calm fire in the brain, one of the ways I can do that is by increasing dopamine through play. Like whenever you laugh with kids in play and you let them be the boss and follow their lead, it creates bonding chemistry and oxytocin and rebuilds trust in the relationship. And there are some people with certain backgrounds who will say, I'm not allowed to play. I got to do it when grandma and grandpa aren't visiting. Or I've got to do it when other people from my cultural background don't see me because it's not appropriate. So you get to decide like what feels appropriate to you. But when it comes to brain development and child development on the inside, if we can meet more of child's psychological and brain-based needs, the fire calms and they walk up to the staircase to be more receptive. And this is where, if you want the best for your kid, this is what we want. We want them to be receptive to listening. And it takes time and it takes practice. But when you can begin seeing challenging behavior as fire in the brain, it also guides us towards like, which of the 8 tools do we really need to practice in order to make the most difference here? All right. That's my intro, friends. So what kind of questions do you have, or what challenge would you like to talk about with your kiddo or your family or the work that you do? If you want to have a conversation, you can type it in the chat box, or if you don't want to have a conversation, but you want me to riff on it, I will. And if you want to have a conversation, there's a little reaction button where you can raise your hand and it puts you in the queue for us to have conversations since we have another half hour here together, or just unmute and start talking. And if you feel comfortable turning your video on, do. I like to see who I'm talking to, but you don't have to. I know there's families here with kids ranging from little kids through 20-year-olds. So I'm happy to field whatever questions come up. I can also structure more content if you'd like me to, but I'd love to leave this space for you. Ruth, you're on. Hi. Yep, so unmute. And I've got all your forums on the screen behind me here. So if you see my eyes darting, it's because I'm reminding myself of what you wrote. I appreciate you taking the time to do that. All right, Ruth, I'm gonna click the button to ask you to unmute. What question do you have? And while you're unmuting, I don't hear you. Oh, almost. I saw it briefly. Yeah. Oh, it's going on and off. Something's funky there. You might have to leave and come back or change your audio and dial in. I'm going to move over to the chat box while you're working that out. I hope it works. Okay, you left. You'll come back. All right, I see you, Emily. Okay, so kindergartner at school. Yeah, on-site childcare, 7:30 to 5, 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. When she comes home hungry and tired, what's a good activity for her until we have dinner ready? All right, let's talk about this. Well, okay. So to answer that question, a good activity for her until we have dinner ready. Yeah, I mean, so it's always important to ask the right question. So I guess what I'm curious about, Emily, is If she's hungry and tired, what do her behaviors look like? And you can get to the top of the queue and unmute if you'd like to have a conversation, or you can type it.
Hey, this is Emily. Um,
Hey.
she, well, she's obviously just tired from a full day. And I mean, when we get home, it's just kind of a scramble because everyone's getting home at the same time and we're trying to throw something together for dinner. So we can't quite be like hands-on with her. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of times in the evening too, like she just will throw like fits,
Yeah.
defiant. She'll just, it'll seem like she's not listening to us or whatever we say goes in one ear and out the other. Is there just like a calm activity that we could have her maybe do by herself? Do you have any good recommendations? I
Mm.
don't or maybe
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh, yes and no. So I can certainly suggest some calm activities, but they're probably not going to be that different from what you've looked at. I'm going to take this a little bit of a different direction because my specialty is unique. So as far as what's happening in her brain, here's what I hear. So she has fire in the brain. She's 5 or 6, and so she's been gone for a really long time. And one of the things that happens in our modern life is I call it the world of so that. So we get up at, I'm just going to make this up, but it's something that a mom told me once. She's like, I get up at 5:30 a.m. so that I can work out on the treadmill for half an hour, so that I can get my other kids up at 6 a.m., so that I can get them ready, eat breakfast on the bus, out the door, so that I can do my household chores, errands, paperwork, so that I can have a snack prepared when they're home, so that I can then guide them through homework time. She had 6 kids, guide them through homework time, have dinner so that then we can clean things up, me help them get to bed by about 9:30 p.m., the last one, and so that I can drop into bed exhausted at 10 p.m. And so here's the thing about the world of so that. When we feel booked back to back, and when kids feel booked and overscheduled, when days are long, we're going to see challenging behaviors because the way our life is unfolding, and I'm going to see if I can find I have an image of this in my parenting workbook. So let me find it, is that we're so focused on completing all of the tasks so that, we can make generate the revenue that we need so that we can put food on the table, so that we can afford housing. There's no judgment around this in any way. But when we live in a world of so that, we're oftentimes more focused on the tasks, and we're thinking like, oh, if I have time left over, then what I'll do is I'll create some space to do things like quality playtime with my kid. Aha, and I found the visual, so thank you for waiting. So when that happens, we are going to see kids who have challenging behavior, because if we're looking at modern life from the perspective of let's make sure the tasks get done and then we can meet your needs, children are going to have challenging behaviors, period. That's what's going to happen. Because a child's psychological need is to have quality time and attention. And so even though we're talking about some of the HALT formula, right? Like she's hungry or angry or lonely or tired. If we're trying to pay attention to getting dinner ready instead of what is her psychological need, then any quiet activity you plug in that moment isn't going to be super effective because it's not meeting the psychological need. So when I think about the psychological need of a kid that age, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you? What do you think one of her needs are? What is she demanding or asking or requesting from you and possibly your partner when she's first home?
Probably to tell us about her day. And she likes to put on a show. Like, so she'll go to her little spot in the kitchen and dance and digest her day, like in
Okay.
song.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing because a quiet activity for her to be on her own is an unreasonable expectation.
Okay.
So thank you for telling me that she likes to dance in the kitchen. Other ways of looking at this. So how do we meet her psychological need? Well, one of them is paying attention to where she can be the boss. So if she can be the boss and put on a little show, that's going to allow you to cook. It's going to give you some transition time. Another way that people would look at this is they would look at, are there meals that you can automate so that it takes less time in the kitchen? But I think one of the most important ingredients is she's going to want your connection in a playful way. So now I'm going to go to another question. And this is like what I do day in and out is like, okay, let's ask the right question, which is, if we want fewer behavior and her psychological need is like putting on a show, how do we create capacity for us to be able to honor that? And if you think about that, and anybody on the chat line, because this is a question relevant to all of us, I know it is. What would be an answer to that question? What would increase your capacity to handle a high energy 5 or 6-year-old when you're tired from the end of a long day too? Do you have ideas, Emily?
Nope.
Increase capacity, increase capacity. I'm in a holistic Ayurveda health program. And so one of the things I've been studying for years, I'm just going to intuitively follow my gut here, is to honor our circadian rhythm. So when we have busy work lives and we're parenting, one of the things we'll often do is we'll have our me time after our kids in bed. And me time in this day and age, pretty naturally, is like Netflix or something related to the screen. But if we look at the way that our circadian rhythm and melatonin and sleep-wake cycles all operate for us as humans to be healthy and to feel grounded and to feel happy, honoring our circadian rhythm and being in bed by 10 p.m. with no screens is one of the things that allows us to get good rest so that when we wake up again, we don't have inflammation from like screen time in our brain or inflammation from not enough sleep. So the garbage collector that usually goes through when we're sleeping can sweep out old inflammation or bad food we've eaten or bugs or anything like that. So it's kind of a big answer. It's kind of a big answer. I don't know if that's helpful, but I'm going to offer that to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. And I'll make sure that I'll leave a little space towards the end. If anybody wants to talk about how do we shift our parenting, like what does my programming look like, I'm happy to share that with you. And then I'll also send an email at the end of this call and have the replay. So if you prefer to look at my program details there, you're welcome to. It's always fun to do a call in February because I run a parent cohort in March and October. So it's just kind of natural. Hopefully this gives you a taste. And if you just got a suggestion that's helpful, you can take and use, great. And if you're like, I need more, I actually need a whole system with a community of parents who are growth oriented, that email will have details and you'd be welcome to join. Okay, so moving into the chat box, if somebody else wants to ask me a question verbally also, feel free to raise the hand reaction. All right, Margaret, so you're wondering, can I suggest a book to help parents move from a structure or discipline mode, like the one that I demonstrated with fire starter language, to more empathetic? Yeah, there's lots of books. One of the books that I like is Dr. Daniel Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson wrote something called No Drama Discipline. And it's got some components of what I reference in terms of calming fire in the brain. But there are some components that I feel really strongly about that aren't in other books. And one of the components that I feel strongly about is when we're talking about discipline. Okay, if we want to move from fire starter language to more empathetic, what's important about discipline is that we have some, and it sounds like that's what you're saying in your question. Discipline is there. How do we become more empathetic? And one of the ways, I'm going to reframe the word empathetic to something like emotionally connected and understanding. Because when a child feels like you see them and you see that they're frustrated and you see that they're upset and you see that they're crying because they're melting down because something feels unfair to them, and this can be any age, to help them feel connected, it doesn't mean we only acknowledge their emotions. It means that we also create the boundaries where they're clear and they've contributed to the family rules. And that's what I teach in my program. How do we create rules that help the child's emotional brain feel like, oh, I'm involved in this? These rules didn't just like appear on the refrigerator and the consequences mapped out with little boxes next to it. Like if you get 3 check marks and you're gonna, whatever. There's a component of having our kids involved and giving them a voice. So I'm changing my answer for you. And if you're looking for more empathetic, then the whole brain child is nice because it gives you the concept of what it means to understand where your kid is coming from so that you don't skip over their psychological need. It's also kind of theoretical and not always practical and step by step. So I'll mention that as well. Yes, Andy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Okay, I was just wondering, if I did your program, I would probably definitely do it because of my 11-year-old who's very fire in the brain type of guy.
Sure.
He's on the spectrum. He's limited verbal. So I was just wondering, like, would your program be able to work for somebody like him and has it in the past?
Yeah, really good question. What are the behaviors that you're seeing
Oh,
that you
well,
want to reduce?
he's very overreactive, hyper vigilant, like to any little thing, like a pencil dropping. I get constantly called by the school to come get him to take him to be seen because of head trauma, possible concussion because
I
he hit
read
his
that.
head on
Mhm.
something. It's just becoming so hard to manage. I do like research constantly.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just kind of at the point where I'm kind of out of resources, and
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
come to the end of my own like education and self-knowledge, and I'm just kind of like out, seeking out other things. And I think I got your newsletter and I was like, whoa, this is like a sign that
Mm.
I need to like go to
Yeah.
her thing
Okay.
on Friday. So I did.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
glad. Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Okay, so let's talk about this. Um, my first instinct is to say, I'm an autism specialist and have that background, so I understand what you're saying. And I know that the tools work for kids who are nonverbal and who are on the spectrum. And because they work for kids with those identities or maybe qualities, it means that if it can work for a child who's really affected, it's also going to work for the kids who are verbal and maybe don't have a diagnosis because it's rooted in brain science. So the question I would have for you is here's where we get really honest, okay? And you can answer this, or you can be like, I don't want to talk about this in a group call, and you can schedule a free 30-minute call with me because I do complimentary consultation calls after this.
mhm.
So because I'm a certified parent coach, I understand that there are certain things that we do as parents that make situations worse. So you can just say yes or no to be, if you want to kind of like be surface level. So the first question I would have is now that you hear this concept of fire in the brain, and we know that your son melting down and really struggling and hitting his head and having other types of violent or hurt behavior,
Mhm.
the question is, do you feel like you match fire with fire, or do you have that part under control?
I feel like I do personally because I work in that environment.
Mhm.
I work with special needs kiddos as a profession.
Mhm.
So I've kind of learned that skill, but I don't feel like my husband does. I don't feel like my old other children do. I don't feel like his people at school do. So he's
Mhm.
not surrounded by it daily.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. So what we know about how kids' behavior can shape over time is that it's really influenced by mirror neurons. So mirror neurons reflect the state other people are in. So
mhm,
you're saying something different than other parents on this call will say. You're saying, I got calm the fire, don't add fuel to the fire, under control. But we also know that the brain shapes more into what it is exposed to. So for
Right.
example, there's a mom of a 19-year-old right now, and her kid's in transition services. And she's
Mhm.
like, my kid does well at home. It's really hard. It's really stressful. It takes a lot of energy for me because my kid's verbal and like cursing at me. But
Mm,
at school, they have fewer tools than I have, and she does really poorly there. And
right.
so the conversation we're having is, well, if the brain becomes what it's most exposed to, what can you influence for her environment? So mom and I are working on strategies for herself, and she's actually looking at a different sort of educational setup for her kid because she's like, oh, I don't want that to work against me. So if you
Right.
have other caregivers in the house that might need some behavioral change, my program, like you get a family registration. So if you have a partner, they can attend. You have older kids, they can listen to the replays as well to get on board. But the other thing isn't just like, and let me show these 8 pillars here. It's really not just about am I matching fire with fire? Because for those of us who aren't yellers, we're like, I got it nailed. Can this help me? Or what else? What's next? Let me share screen. So what we do once we calm the fire in our own brain, so those mirror neurons are showing for kids, is we also learn to avoid fire starters. So you're probably familiar, like your kid's going to need some heads up around transitions. Maybe your kid will need some visual charts to predict what's coming next. This is true for kids who have anxiety as well, for those of you who are listening and don't have a kid on the spectrum. But then it's also about calm fire in the brain and how do we build trust and connection. So these are kids who are on the spectrum. This can apply if your kid has a disrupted attachment. It can apply for many other reasons as well. So there are ways of following kids play where, and this was the first thing I discovered as a speech therapist actually, was how do I let the kid be the boss and join them in a more naturalistic play? Because it helps them to feel empowered. And anytime a child has control in areas that are appropriate for them. So I remember working with an 8-year-old doing lightsabers, and he's like, "Ah, you're dead." And part of me is, I don't know, I was 27 at the time. I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're not supposed to play dead. That's violent." But we were in a home setting, and it was okay with his parents. So what I learned from play therapists is that if kids get to be the boss and you're not trying to shape it like, no, 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 don't hurt people, quick, call the ambulance and try to fix the situation, you're now taking play off track. And so they don't get grounded and empowered in this deep sense of dopamine that helps to offset some of the fire in the brain. So I would be curious, what are some of the pieces from these 8 pillars if we work our way up, like, and how are you doing with following through on instructions? And if not you, the other caregivers, how are you with creating the routines and predictability? How are you with doing a sort of time in where your body also stays safe? Because even kids who are nonverbal autistic, when you have your few family rules, they're able to pause rather than lashing out. So I guess that's my answer, but it's also kind of high level since I don't know all of your detail. What comes to mind when you're hearing some of this? What's ringing true
Yeah.
or confusing?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like we as a family could definitely use a lot more consistency and like routine. I feel like once he's at home, it's kind of like, oh, I can do whatever I want. It's free for all, you know. He is more relaxed in this setting. I feel like there are more demands placed on him at school, of course, so he's going to have some pushback. So I think that's maybe where that comes in, and he is in fight or flight mode. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's one of these, I like to be kind of, I mean, I'm kind of a pleaser, but I also like to be direct and stir things, stir the pot sometimes. So I wrote a blog a long time ago. It was that um kids falling apart at home because they feel safe with us is a parenting myth. And you hear that at first glance. And I'm glad you can all see me smiling about this because sometimes we're like, oh, my kid's just letting it out at home. It's like, well, yeah, they're letting it out at home, but are we meeting their needs for things like rhythm and predictability? And we know kids on the spectrum or with high anxiety, we know that that predictability is going to help them like follow the path in a way that calms the brain. And then there's other components of it too. So you're welcome to join. And if you wanted to have a conversation with me, samanthamo.com/parents, I've got a scheduling link, and I'll put that in the email as well, in the PS line if you wanted to set something up, or you're welcome to join. Welcome to join the program if you feel good to go.
Okay, thank
Yeah, you're welcome. And I snagged my testimonial playlist so you can watch other family stories. And at the end of February, there's a mom of an autistic 14-year-old. I'm capturing her video story in 2 weeks, and then we'll send that out. So if you feel like you need a little bit more storytelling around it, she'll share her experience. All right, so let me go back to chat box here. All right, I see a private message about defiant behavior. Is it lack of connection or other? And I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure what your message means. So you can unmute, or you could type more.
This Samantha. So I was
Yes.
able to get my microphone to work. So my
Yay.
question is around defiant behavior. So if you have rules, the kid seems to be following them, but there is the aftermath, like being defiant about it. Like, I'm not happy, but I'm going to do it, and just making almost wanting to hit me, I guess is a better description. And so goes along with it. He understands. I provide the information about what's, it's time to take a shower. The timer went off. Let's go take a shower. But there's always that charging that makes any defined behavior is the best way I can put it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'm trying to look for your form quickly. I don't know if I see it. How old is your kiddo?
4.
4. Oh, yeah, I know. Solidarity, sister. Right, little kid at home. Yeah, so here's what you need. What you need a lot of. You need a lot of avoiding the fire starter of over teaching with logic. Because what we do with our kids who are these ages is they might be following the rules, and you might be good at setting the boundary and saying it's time to take a shower. But then when he's like charging at you, you might be over teaching with logic and saying things like, no, that's not how we do it. You have to listen. If you want to read your books, this is what needs to happen. And all of that is very left brain language. And it decreases a kid's feeling of having control, because they're just like, you don't see me, you don't hear me, you're just making me take a shower. So what I would suggest is you're going to need to develop a habit, or not need to, sorry, you're invited to. I'm not going to force anybody to do anything, but your best friends are going to be the tool of learning how to connect with your kids' emotions and say things like, yeah, I see you're upset. And not like a body worker style, like, hi, how are you feeling today? But more like kind of neutral, like, yeah, I see you're upset, and it is time to shower. But the reason my program is 8 pillars is because acknowledging emotions and having firm boundaries on things like taking a shower, that's not the only way that's not enough for creating peace at home. So in order to like have enjoyable time where you're tapping into your child's silliness and like, now we're taking a shower and we're singing the song about, it's raining, it's pouring, or whatever happens in those playful moments, is we need to balance it out with things like, are you also staying calm? Or are you getting ticked off because you're like, I'm so tired of repeating myself and telling you why we have to do all of this? Because that's going to create stress in the strong-willed kid's brain. So we balance it out by having moments where you literally set your timer for 15 minutes to balance out like these stressful moments, because it's hard for him to follow directions, which is part of temperament and development. With now let's have happy time. Like the play strategy and techniques are really important for that, as well as staying calm in that moment and not letting the redundancy and the ridiculous amount of repetition that we all have to go through as parents, to not let it trigger you. Does that resonate with you? How's that landing?
Makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. All right, move it. Oh, we're getting close to the top of the hour. Let me look at questions. Oh, thank you, Lisa. Lisa's here and ducked off. Taking the pillars course was a huge help. Changing the way I did things made the use of the pillars beneficial. Yeah, we work a lot on habit change. It's one thing to have knowledge and read books. It's another to actually change your behavior. And the concept of fire in the brain resonated because she had it and it created more fire with her son. Yep, that's true. Margaret, thank you for that suggestion about timers. Very nice. And sensory challenges. Yeah, I mean, sensory challenges are a real thing. So I want to share in support of you all is that if you feel like this is kind of peeling back a layer of the onion and resonating with you, my specialty is parenting. It's the space for parents so we can ask these questions and we can be guided systematically into tools that calm fire in the brain, build positive connection so that we have mutual listening. Meaning like your kid listens to you, but also they listen to you because you listen to them, the emotional need, the child's agenda, the play needs. And we figure out like, how do we do that if we're working 11-hour days and we have 6 kids and we, like all of these different factors. I'm low on energy, all of those different things. So if you wanted to stick around, I'm happy to talk about what the upcoming program looks like. And if you prefer to listen to it or read about it privately, you'll get that email. But I'll answer these questions that I got directly here so that I can shed light for those of you who are curious. So the way that my program works is I teach my 8 pillars. You can actually get my 8 pillars online. It's a DIY program if you wanted. And I'll show you my website here. So you can learn these 8 pillars and be self-guided. But while it's fabulous because it teaches you a concept like fire in the brain and gives you an action step and some troubleshooting videos, my favorite thing to do is to lead my live group program. And so we're opening that up starting just now. And the way the live group program works is you get access to the DIY. It's included in the cost. The $495 program is included. And we do a live cohort once a week for 8 weeks. So I give you the assignment to watch something like pillar number 1. So you're starting to build the foundation. And we're going to meet on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Central for 8 weeks. We record them because a lot of families need to listen to it on their own time or they want to re-listen to it. And on those coaching calls, we don't straight up do re-education because that's your pre-class assignment. What we do is we take you through transformational activities so you understand like, what does my fire look like? Oh, which ones really trigger my kid? We give you work time on the calls and Q&A so that I can offer some personalized coaching for you so that we can apply it if you have a neurotypical 5-year-old or an autistic 11-year-old or somebody that has some characteristics that are different from you. The reason I love this group program is because you get to hear from other parents and you don't feel so alone. You're like, oh, I need a schedule too. I need a rhythm. And so we talk about how to do that each week for the 8 weeks as you layer the tools in. You also in parallel get access to, and the program details are listed here. You also get access to my Mad to Glad community calls. So it's kind of like these calls, except for anybody who's paid to go through Mad to Glad Blueprint. So everyone's seasoned and they have a foundation of the 8 tools where I offer those on different days and times during the week, twice a month. And you get access to that for 6 months. So it's a way to like go through the cohort in 8 weeks and show up for extra Ask Samantha calls if you want. You get it for another 4 months after your 8-week course is over, which means you have the ability to go through each of the 8 pillars again. We kind of repeat them for 10 minutes. We'll do a summary and special topic teaching and take you through more implementation exercises because it takes time for us to really change our habits. And that way, people don't end up back at square one. So to remember for myself, that I said the dates right, Wednesday, March 13th, those live calls on Wednesdays are 75 minutes for 8 weeks. The Ask Samantha calls are scheduled on different days and times of the week. And the program is $1,850. So it's a 6-month program, plus you get the DIY, plus you get all the replays. And the registration link is listed on that form here. So we'll put that in the email as well. But the curriculum, if you wanted to read about that, is all listed here. And I know I already told you that one of my favorite parts about it is the community. But the other thing that I love is that I've certified over 60 professionals to be Mad to Glad certified. And so we have mentors in our community. One of them who helps co-lead my calls, her name is Uzma. It allows you to hear the information from another perspective, as well as supporting the Facebook group. And I think we have about 400 families in there right now that can lean in and offer their wisdom as you go through the program. What else did I miss? Oh, you're wondering, is it covered by insurance? Parent coaching is covered by flex spending and HSA. That's new as of the last handful of years. It never used to be. So you can use those funds for it. some families who have waivers and grants, you can use that for it. I would want to just do a one-on-one call with you so that you can fill out some background information and I can submit a letter to whoever writes those up for you. And then what else am I missing? Are there other questions that you have? You heard that it's a family registration. So if you're like me and I don't like forwarding emails and reminders about calls to my husband, you can sign your co-parent up for no added cost so that they get all the reminder emails and program access and they don't screw up your progress bar at the top. If you're like, I'm three pillars in, they can have their own. Okay, what else? What else might I be missing? Any other questions coming up? I'm gonna look at my form to see if I missed anything. If you decide to do a one-on-one call with me, you're welcome. You're welcome, Margaret. I really want to understand what the cost of behaviors is for your family. So to give you one more thing to think about, if you're interested, I think it's important for us to evaluate. Sometimes one of the biggest hangups about, am I gonna address parenting now? We have to understand why. Why now? And so maybe you've learned some other programs before. Maybe you're tired of waking up at 2 a.m. and your kid's melting down and you're like trying to figure out how to navigate the situation and you're getting a lot of calls from the school. I really evaluate on those one-on-one calls with you how much time is being spent worrying, researching, talking to specialists. What do you know? What have you tried? What works? What doesn't? This helps us understand and point us in the direction of what are going to be your top 3 pillars that you're going to really need to learn here so that you can pay special attention to that as you go through the program. And even if you don't do the one-on-one call, you'll understand that the way the program is structured anyway, but if you want that extra connection, I'm happy to do it. And sometimes in parenting, I would like to take the stigma out of it. We're like, if I need to get parenting support, what does that mean? And I feel like that means you're a great parent because you're willing to be vulnerable and admit that there might be a way you could influence your child differently. And I know that's true for a lot of people in my immediate family of origin as well. So it's a really sacred space that we create. And I love the quote, like, well, when's the best time to plant a tree? Is it too late? And my specialty is really, if your kid doesn't have a diagnosis, my specialty is 3 to 13. If they have some sort of special needs diagnosis, I can go much beyond the age of 13. But it's really like creating the foundation for those relationships so that when you enter the teen years, it's already smooth. You already have a smooth stone path to follow instead of expecting bumpy years ahead. And if we miss kids' psychological needs about following some of their lead and their agenda and some of that silliness when they're younger, then the neural pathway about stress and fire deepens. And so that makes it harder to interact when they're teenagers. It doesn't mean it's impossible because we can always build trust and relationship and the brain can change. But it means if you're thinking now, it might save you some time and energy down the road. Okay, I see this question. Thank you. Trauma informed. How much does my program go into that? Well, I'm not sure what you mean. I'm super trauma informed. A lot of my continuing education is in organic intelligence and focusing on the things that move us out of the state of trauma triggers. And I think that's really important for us as parents, orienting to what feels safe and what feels good. Because when we start looking at changing our habits, even things like, do I need to work less? Do I need to sleep more? Like all of those things can trigger stress in some ways. So if you have a follow-up question on that, feel free to ask it. But I don't teach adverse childhood experiences. If you're familiar with the ACEs, I was invited to do a children's mental health TED Talk by Minnesota State in 2018, 19, 18, one of those years. So a lot of my continuing education is trauma informed. But happy to answer more if you have questions on it. I focus more on practical because my brain simplifies and digests into action steps. So when I hear that there are certain things that trigger trauma, then we say, so what do we do instead? What are the fire starters that trigger trauma? And in the process, it doesn't mean you don't necessarily need therapy if there's some trauma that needs to be addressed or some EMDR therapy that needs to happen for a preverbal kiddo. Oh, good. I'm glad that explained it. Thank you. and it doesn't mean like if you have some concerns about sensory, like that comes up in our conversations all the time in the group setting. Some kids need pediatric chiropractic because like my kid had birth trauma. And so we needed a body-based approach to help like the stuff that was crammed from posterior labor and asynclitic and turned in a way that disrupted some of the stress response in his brain that just kept fueling and crying around the clock. So yeah, lots of prongs. So thank you for your time. There's a Chinese proverb. When was the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When was the second best time? Today, right now. So if you're inclined to address parenting, join us in the community. Click on the links in the email, and happy to do a one-on-one call if that would be supportive of you. We've got a few weeks to enroll people, and then we close the doors, and we don't offer it again till the fall. So thanks for spending time with me. Have a great weekend. Bye, everyone. You're welcome. Yeah, you're so welcome.